The chandeliers above the Grand Mirabelle glittered like captured lightning. Every crystal flickered with the reflection of power, money, ambition, danger. At the center table, Larry Stokes, the man newspaper called the gentleman mobster, held a pen worth more than most people's homes. He leaned forward, eyes on the contract in front of him. $500 million. A deal that would stretch his empire across continents. Across from him sat Hussein Assaf, a Saudi investor wrapped in white silk and mystery. His every movement oozed calm confidence. But behind that smile, there was something colder, something calculated. And then, it happened. A voice ripped through the silence. "Stop. Don't sign that contract, Mr. Stokes. For God's sake, don't do it." The sound froze the room. Glasses stopped mid-air. Waiters froze like statues. Every pair of eyes turned toward the man who had dared to interrupt a mafia deal worth $500 million. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a security guard. He wasn't even supposed to be in the room. He was just the janitor. James Saunders stood a few feet away, his dark skin glistening under the chandeliers, a mop handle clutched in his trembling hand like a weapon. His blue uniform looked completely out of place in this room of tuxedos and silk suits. "Who the hell said that?" Stokes barked, spinning toward him. James's chest rose and fell. "Me, sir. I said it." The air was thick enough to choke on. "Stop the signing. You don't understand what you're about to do." Hussein chuckled softly, glancing at Stokes. "Your cleaner's having a nervous breakdown." But James didn't move, didn't blink, didn't back down. "And you, you watching, what would you have done if you were him? Would you risk your life to stop a mafia boss from walking into his own trap? Drop your thoughts below, because what James did next changed everything. Hussein's voice dripped with mockery. "Mr. Stokes, shall I have him removed?" Stokes waved his hand impatiently. "James, I pay you to clean floors, not interrupt billion-dollar meetings." James's voice cracked, but the fire in his eyes didn't. "Sir, please. That contract, it's not what you think. The deal's a setup. If you sign it, you won't live to see the sunrise." Laughter rippled from one of the bodyguards. Another waiter whispered under his breath. But Stokes leaned back, curiosity flickering behind the arrogance. "And you know this how?" James swallowed hard. "Because I heard them planning it. 3 nights ago." That wiped the smile off Hussein's face. A small, precise pause hung in the air. "You heard something?" Hussein asked, his accent slipping slightly. James nodded slowly. "Enough to know you're not partners. You're predators." The chandeliers hummed softly above them, every light flickering as if even electricity knew something dangerous was coming. Let's pause here for a second. If you're hooked already, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story's about to take a darker turn. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now, back to the story. Hussein's smirk returned. "Mr. Stokes, this is getting ridiculous. Your janitor's been watching too many crime movies." He turned to his guards. "Remove him." But Stokes raised his hand. "Wait." James took a deep breath. "You think I'm crazy? Then let me prove it." He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small tablet. Every guard tensed. Every gun hand twitched. James placed the device gently on the table between them. "Play it," he said quietly. On the screen, a grainy hallway video flickered to life. 2 figures, one tall in a white robe, one broad-shouldered, in a dark suit. Their voices clear, calm, and deadly. Hussein's voice came through the speakers, speaking Arabic. Once the fool signs, we drain his accounts through the shell companies. By the time the Americans find out, he'll be dead. The room went silent. Stokes's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked to Hussein. What did he just say? Hussein smiled tightly. Out of context. Lies. That video could be fake? James cut in sharply. Then why do I have 3 more recordings, including one where your consigliere, Marco, says, and I quote, "Once Stokes is gone, the feds will close the case for us." Now even the waiters had stopped pretending not to listen. Stokes rose slowly from his chair. You're telling me this man was planning to kill me? Hussein's eyes hardened. You're listening to the help, Larry. James took a step closer. Sometimes, the help's the only one who's actually listening. Have you ever noticed how the people we ignore usually see the most? Drop a comment if you've ever worked a job where people treated you like you were invisible. James knew that feeling better than anyone. And that invisibility, it's what saved his life. Stokes leaned forward, his tone turning sharp. If this is true, Hussein, you've made the worst mistake of your life. Hussein's hands rested calmly on the tablecloth. Or perhaps you have. His fingers slid beneath the table. James's eyes widened. Mr. Stokes, don't move! A gunshot shattered the chandeliers. Screams erupted. Glass rained down like diamonds. James lunged forward, tackling Stokes to the ground as the bullet ripped through the sleeve of the Mafia boss's suit. The guards dove. Chaos exploded. Tables overturned. Silverware clattered across marble. James slammed the fire alarm, filling the restaurant with blaring sirens and flashing red lights. Through the smoke and screaming, he pressed a hand to Stokes's shoulder. I told you, he panted. Don't sign that contract. Outside, police sirens wailed. Inside, one janitor had just changed the course of a criminal empire. But here's the thing. That gunshot? It was just the beginning. Because by morning, the truth James carried would expose not just Hussein, but Stokes's own men. And you're not ready for what comes next. What would you do if you overheard a billion-dollar betrayal, but no one would believe you? Would you risk your life like James did, or walk away? Drop your answer below. And if you're loving this story, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay tuned. Because we are about to go deeper. The Mafia's retaliation begins. The sirens outside the Grand Mirabelle still echoed in James's ears. He could still smell the gunpowder, feel the sting of glass on his arms. But before all this, before the chaos, before the gunfire, James Saunders was just a shadow. A man nobody noticed. Every morning at Stokes Enterprises, James clocked in at 5:45 a.m. sharp. By 6 o'clock, he was invisible. He moved through the marble corridors with a quiet rhythm. Mop, rinse, polish, repeat. Executives brushed past him without a glance. The guards nodded, barely seeing him. He learned their patterns, who arrived late, who stayed overnight, who came in with lipstick stains that didn't belong to their wives. Every whisper, every secret. They all thought the janitor wasn't listening. But James listened to everything. Being invisible, he once told himself, isn't a curse. It's camouflage. And you watching right now, have you ever felt that way? Like you were right there, but nobody saw you? Let me tell you something. invisibility has power. Years ago, James hadn't been invisible. He'd been James Saunders, systems engineer, co-founder of a Lagos cybersecurity firm trusted by banks and governments. He wore suits then, too, though never as fine as the ones he polished now. His company was thriving. His wife, Tola, was alive. They were planning a future. Then came the audit. A foreign corporation, Stokes Global Holdings, had invested heavily in their sector. A routine compliance check, they called it. Within 3 months, James's company was gone. Servers wiped, licenses revoked, investigations, taxes, frozen accounts. And through it all, one name kept appearing in the paperwork: Larry Stokes. He'd never met the man, but he'd seen the signature. And that signature had cost James everything. His wife's heart gave out during the stress of the collapse. He buried her under the rain, sold what was left. And when the last light in Lagos went dark behind him, James boarded a plane to America, just to survive. He took the first job he could find, night janitor at Stokes Enterprises. Fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. At first, he told himself he'd quit in a few weeks. But weeks became months. Months became 3 years. 3 years of wiping away the blood no one talked about. 3 years of watching envelopes slide across tables in dim-lit boardrooms. 3 years of learning the hierarchy of silence. Speak and disappear. Obey and survive. He saw too much, but no one saw him. And maybe that was why he started keeping notes. Mental maps of the rot beneath the empire. Offshore accounts. Coded ledgers. Backroom deals that smelled of oil and death. Then, 3 nights ago, everything changed. He was polishing the brass railing near the executive lounge, long after midnight. The lights inside were dim, the curtains half drawn. He heard laughter first, 2 voices, Hussein Assaf and Marco Leone, Stokes's. Deusiliere. James paused, instinctively quiet. The voices were low, in Arabic. He didn't know much Arabic, but his late wife did, and her lessons still lived in his mind. Enough to recognize words, enough to feel the weight behind them. Once he signs, "Transfer the accounts." "Kill." He froze. The mop water rippled as his hand trembled. They were planning something, a betrayal disguised as a business deal. Hussein's voice was smooth, almost cheerful. By the time he realizes, the Americans will be the ones hunted. The body will be an accident. James's heart pounded. He recorded the conversation through the security camera tablet left on the cart. Then he spent the next 2 nights verifying everything. The shell companies, the hidden clauses, the timing. It all fits. Stokes was walking into a death trap worth $500 million. He'd cleaned that man's blood before. He wasn't about to clean it again. Now pause for a second. If you were James, what would you do? Would you keep your head down and stay alive, or stand up to the men who could end you in 1 phone call? Drop your answer in the comments, because that's the decision James had to make. And 3 nights later, he made it. He walked into the Grand Mirabelle with a mop in his hand, and a plan that could expose an empire. When the gunshot echoed through the restaurant that night, James Saunders stopped being invisible. But what he didn't know was that the men he'd just exposed weren't done yet. And the real war, the one that would test his loyalty, his courage, and his soul, was only beginning. If this story's pulling you in, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. What do you think will happen when Stokes learns one of his own men betrayed him? Comment your prediction below. The night after the Mirabelle confrontation, James couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the echo of that gunshot. And beneath it, another voice. Soft, feminine, steady. His wife's. Habibi, repeat after me. La tansa al-haqiqa. Don't forget the truth. Her laughter, once the rhythm of his evenings, played faintly in his mind as he sat alone in his small apartment, the city lights flickering against the window. He rubbed his temples and whispered the words again like a prayer. Don't forget the truth. 3 nights earlier, he hadn't just overheard a conversation. He'd heard a death sentence disguised as business. He could still hear their voices, Hussein Assaf and Marco Leone, in that mix of Arabic and English that made his stomach turn. Once he signs, it's ours. His accounts transfer automatically. And the Americans, they'll take the fall. Then a pause. Then laughter. The kind of laughter that never reaches the eyes. James had crouched behind the cleaning cart, sweat dripping down his back, the mop handle trembling in his grip. He hadn't breathed until they left. Every word he remembered now was a ghost, whispering in his ear. You ever had a memory that won't let you rest? That one moment you wish you could unhear, unsee, unknow, because that's where James was, caught between duty and survival. He could ignore it, pretend it never happened. Or he could act and die trying. The next morning, the world at Stokes Enterprises buzzed with excitement. The big deal was only days away. Executives strutted through the glass halls with champagne and smiles. Secretaries whispered about bonuses. Even the news ticker in the lobby flashed. Stokes Global enters historic partnership with Assaf Investments. The only one not celebrating was the janitor cleaning up after them. James pushed his cart quietly past open doors and laughter. He wiped away smudges from glass tables and handprints from marble. They didn't see him. But he saw everything. The new files marked confidential, the sudden security upgrades, and Marco Leone's cold smirk every time Hussein's name came up. Every detail was a warning he couldn't ignore. That night, as the city lights blinked against the skyscraper windows, James sat alone in the janitor's supply room, elbows on his knees, staring at his reflection in a bucket of water. If he stayed silent, no one would ever know. He could keep his head down, finish his shifts, and maybe one day go home. But he'd already buried one life, one wife, one truth that cost him everything. Could he really watch another man walk into the same kind of ruin, even if that man was Larry Stokes? Don't forget the truth. Her voice echoed again, soft as breath, sharp as guilt. He closed his eyes. Then he made his decision. 2 nights later, Hussein Assaf returned to the executive lounge. James was ready. Hidden in the cleaning cart were 2 micro cameras, one tucked behind the spray bottle, another under the waste bin. They were motion-triggered, linked to his old engineer tablet. While pretending to polish brass, he positioned the cart near the door and quietly stepped out. He watched from the hallway as the lights flickered on. Hussein entered, followed by Marco. Their voices, smooth, confident, filled the room once again. After the signature, Hussein said, everything moves offshore. And Stokes? Marco asked. Hussein chuckled. He'll never know what hit him. The Americans always think they're the hunters. James's heart pounded. He slipped away before they could see him, forcing his face to stay calm as he walked past security. Hours later, in his apartment, he connected the cameras to his tablet. The screen flickered. Then the sound came, crisp, undeniable. The conversation played back in full, every word, every threat, every plan. His pulse raced. He rewound it twice to be sure. Once he signs, it's ours. The Americans will take the fall. James exhaled shakily, pressing a trembling hand against his chest. It was real. The betrayal was real. He leaned back in the chair, whispering to himself, "If this is real, I just signed my own death sentence." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the old refrigerator. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, a haunting reminder of the world he'd stepped into. James closed the tablet and looked out the window, his reflection overlapping the city skyline. Invisible, no more. But now, he wasn't sure he'd live long enough to regret it. If you were in James's shoes, what would you do next? Turn the evidence over, or run before they find you? Drop your answer below. The Grand Mirabelle glittered with elegance again that night. But beneath the chandeliers, tension burned hotter than the candle flames. Security men circled the room. Waiters froze mid-step. Every whisper, every gasp hung in the air as Larry Stokes slammed his palm on the table. "Somebody explain what the hell is going on!" Across from him, Hussein Assaf adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate calm. "Your employee," he said smoothly, "seems to be confused. Perhaps too much cleaning fluid has gotten to his head." The room gave a nervous chuckle, all except James Saunders. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He stood like a man who'd already made peace with death. "Sir," James said quietly, "the contract in front of you, it's not a partnership. It's a transfer of ownership." Stokes frowned, the vein in his temple twitching. "What are you talking about?" James stepped closer, voice firm now, echoing beneath the chandeliers. "The Arabic clause you signed off on, it doesn't say joint partnership. It says complete transfer of assets after 72 hours. You're not gaining a partner, Mr. Stokes. You're selling your empire." A wave of murmurs rippled across the dining hall. Hussein leaned back, smiling unwavering. "Arabic is a complex language. I assure you, my lawyers and yours reviewed every word." "Your lawyers," James shot back. "Not his." Stokes turned sharply to Hussein. "Is that true?" "Larry," Hussein said, his voice suddenly silky and persuasive, "you're letting the help embarrass you. The man is a janitor, not a translator." James's chest rose and fell with controlled anger. "You think I'm stupid, sir? I learned Arabic from my wife, God rest her soul. And I know the difference between musharaka and naql. One means partnership." He took a step forward, eyes burning. "The other means transfer." The restaurant fell into dead silence. Stokes's expression flickered. Doubt, faint but unmistakable, crawled across his face. "Are you certain?" he asked. James nodded. "Certain enough to bet my life on it." Hussein laughed softly, but the sound was hollow now. "This is ridiculous. You'd take the word of a janitor over a signed legal document?" Stokes hesitated, and that hesitation was all James needed. He reached into his uniform pocket, slow, deliberate, and pulled out his worn tablet. "Then listen for yourself," James said. He tapped the screen. A video played, its sound echoing through the grand hall. Hussein's voice, in Arabic. Once the fool signs, we drain his accounts through the shell companies. By the time the feds catch on, the Americans will take the fall. Marco Leone's voice. And the body? Hussein. An accident. Same as always. The room went still. Every guest, every guard, every waiter froze where they stood. Hussein's smile evaporated. His eyes flickered toward the door. Then the guards, then the tablecloth. Stokes's pen dropped to the floor. His voice was a low growl. You set me up. Larry, Hussein said quickly. You're overreacting. Don't, Stokes barked. Don't lie to me. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Hussein exhaled slowly, and that calm, charming facade returned like a mask sliding back into place. Fine, he said softly. You want the truth? His right hand slid beneath the table. James saw it first, the subtle twitch, the shift in his shoulder, the glint of metal catching the light. His blood went cold. Don't move, James said, voice low. He's armed. Stokes froze, confusion flickering. What? Don't move, James shouted, louder now, stepping forward. He's got a gun! The guards reacted a heartbeat too late. Hussein's chair scraped back, his hand emerging with a flash of silver. A gunshot thundered through the restaurant. The chandeliers trembled, sending cascades of crystal light across terrified faces. Glass shattered. Guests screamed. James lunged toward Stokes, grabbing him by the shoulder and dragging him down. The bullet ripped through the air, splintering the edge of the table where Stokes's head had been. The world erupted into chaos. And you, if you were there that night, would you have frozen or moved? Would you have trusted the janitor or the millionaire? Drop your thoughts below, because what happens next will shake every truth in this story. If you're hooked, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The gunshot shattered the silence of luxury. Crystal rained from the chandeliers like glittering shards of thunder. The Grand Mirabelle, a palace of wealth and arrogance, erupted into chaos. For one suspended heartbeat, Larry Stokes just stood there, eyes wide. Then James Saunders tackled him to the ground. The bullet tore through the air, grazing Stokes's arm before splintering into the mahogany wall behind them. He gasped in shock, clutching the wound. Blood soaked the white sleeve of his tailored suit. Screams broke out across the restaurant. Tables overturned. Glass shattered under frantic feet. Guards lunged toward Hussein Assaf, but the Saudi investor was already moving, fast, silent, calm, like a man who had done this before. James's ears rang from the gunfire. He rolled to his feet, grabbed the edge of the overturned table, and slammed his palm against the fire alarm on the wall. Instantly, chaos turned red. Strobe lights flashed. Sirens screamed through the hall like the city itself was panicking. Sprinklers burst open overhead, drenching silk suits and million-dollar haircuts. Through the rain of water and light, James saw Hussein shove through the crowd, gun in one hand, briefcase in the other. "Stop him!" one of the bodyguards roared, but the guests, terrified and soaked, scattered like dominoes, blocking the path. Hussein vanished into the kitchen doors, the metallic clang echoing behind him. James turned back to Stokes, blood pooling around the broken glass near his shoulder. "You hit?" he shouted over the alarms. Stokes grimaced, nodding. "Just a graze. Get me up." James hauled him to his feet, gripping his good arm. "Stay low, sir. He's heading for the service exit." Two security men burst through the kitchen doors, then stopped. "The briefcase!" one of them yelled. He dropped it. James's eyes darted to the floor. There it was, Hussein's briefcase, lying open beside a toppled wine cart, papers spilling out like a confession. James crouched, heart hammering. Inside were documents, rows of names, offshore accounts, wire transfers, coded spreadsheets, and one logo that froze him in place. Stokes Global Holdings. He looked up, meeting Stokes's eyes. This is proof, he said, voice trembling. He's been bleeding your empire for years. Outside, the night exploded with flashing lights. Police sirens wailed as squad cars screeched to a stop in front of the Mirabelle. Officers poured through the doors, weapons drawn, shouting orders through the chaos. Hands up! Everyone stay where you are! Camera flashes began popping behind them, news crews already swarming. The story was breaking in real time. A mafia boss, a foreign investor, a janitor who stopped a $500 million deal with a single shout. And now, the world was watching. James stepped aside as paramedics rushed in. They lifted Stokes onto a stretcher, cutting the fabric around his wound. For the first time that night, the mafia boss looked human. No arrogance, no swagger, just pain, confusion, and something that looked like gratitude trying to find its way through. The flashing red lights painted the scene like a war zone. Wet marble floors, champagne bottles rolling across the ground, crystal fragments glowing under the strobes. As they lifted Stokes onto the stretcher, he caught James's wrist with surprising strength. His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the sirens. "Why?" Stokes whispered. "Why did you save me?" James stared down at him, rain and sweat dripping down his face. "Because once," he said quietly, "I believed men like you were untouchable." He paused, eyes unsteady. "I stopped believing that tonight." The paramedics rolled Stokes out under the flashing lights. James stood there, soaked to the skin, the fire alarm still blaring above him. Behind him, officers bagged the briefcase and hushed murmurs spread among the crowd. He looked down at the shattered floor. Blood, water, glass, and the broken reflection of a man who no longer belonged to the shadows. The invisible janitor had just changed the course of an empire, and in doing so, he had just painted a target on his own back. Now, here's a question for you watching this. If you were James, would you hand over that briefcase to the police, or keep it as your leverage? Because the next move could mean the difference between freedom and death. Drop your answer below. And if this story's got your heart racing, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The antiseptic sting of the hospital burned James's nose. Machines beeped in quiet rhythm, a strange kind of orchestra after the chaos of the Mirabelle. Larry Stokes lay in a hospital bed, his right arm wrapped in clean white bandages, his expensive watch still clasped around the wrist like pride refusing to die. 2 armed guards stood by the door. The TV above played muted news footage of flashing lights outside the Grand Mirabelle. Headlines scrolled across the screen. Mafia financier targeted in 500 murderous assassination plot. Stokes turned his gaze from the TV to the man sitting across from him, the janitor who had saved his life. "Start talking," he said. His voice was low, hoarse, dangerous. "Who are you, really?" James sat straight in the chair, his hands clasped. He looked tired, like a man who'd spent too many nights running from ghosts. "My name's James Saunders," he said. I used to be a systems engineer in Lagos. I built cybersecurity protocols for government contracts. My company was small but clean. We did things right. Stokes's eyes narrowed. And what happened? You happened. That made Stokes blink. What? Your firm, Stokes Global Holdings, launched a compliance audit in West Africa. Within months, our accounts were frozen, assets seized, and my company was gone. James looked down, voice tight. My wife died a year later. Stress, heart failure, all of it. I lost everything. I came here for work. Ended up cleaning your floors. The words hung heavy in the sterile air. For once, Larry Stokes didn't know what to say. He looked away, jaw tightening. I don't do my own audits, he muttered. Maybe not, James said quietly, but your empire does what you allow it to. Stokes's eyes returned to him, sharp again. And the deal with Hussein? James leaned forward. I overheard him and Marco 3 nights ago, speaking Arabic. I don't speak it well, but my late wife taught me enough to understand words like kill, transfer, and betrayal. I used the cleaning cameras to record the conversation. The rest, I confirmed myself. He pulled a manila folder from his coat. Inside were printouts, USB drives, and a stack of screenshots. Everything's here. Encrypted files, offshore transfers, voice notes. It's all linked. Hussein's accounts, and... He hesitated. Oh, someone inside your circle. Stokes frowned. Inside my circle? James nodded slowly. Hussein wasn't working with you. He was working through someone close. Your consigliere, Marco Leone. The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Stokes went still. For a moment, the world shrank to the sound of the machines beeping beside him. His voice came out low, like a man struggling to breathe. Marco? James met his gaze. They planned everything together. The contract, the shell companies, the assassination. Hussein's people said it plainly. Once the ink dried, Marco would inherit your seat, and your death would look like business gone wrong. Across the city, the lights of a penthouse flickered against the skyline. Marco Leone stood before a wall of windows, phone pressed to his ear, his reflection cutting through the glass like a ghost. Did it happen? He asked, voice cold. On the other end, a low reply in Arabic. The plan failed. The janitor interfered. Marco exhaled, jaw tightening. Then we finished the job. He hung up and poured himself a drink, the ice clinking against crystal. His smile was small, bitter, and certain. Back in the hospital, Stokes turned over the folder James had handed him. His thumb brushed the label on the first USB drive. Hussein calls 19. He slid it into a laptop on the bedside table. The screen flickered. A voice played through the tinny speakers, calm, confident, and unmistakably familiar. Marco Leone, on tape. Once the signature's done, move him out quietly. No noise. The body goes to the docks, same as last time. The sound of ice clinking. A brief laugh, then silence. Stokes froze. His breathing slowed, the color draining from his face. His eyes darkened. Not with shock, but something deeper, something dangerous. I trusted him more than my own brother, he whispered. James didn't speak. The machines kept their steady rhythm, a reminder that both men were still alive, though something in Stokes had just died. Outside the window, dawn crept over the city skyline, pale, cold, and merciless. 2 men sat in silence, one wounded in flesh, the other in faith, and between them, a single folder full of truths sharp enough to draw blood. Now pause for a second. What do you think Stokes will do when he faces Marco? Will he seek justice or vengeance? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. The night skyline burned in gold and glass. From the 52nd floor of Stokes's penthouse, the city looked peaceful, unaware that inside, betrayal was about to bleed its way into truth. Stokes stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his right arm still bandaged, a tumbler of scotch untouched in his left hand. The reflection staring back at him was a man who no longer recognized himself. Behind him, the elevator chimed. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. Marco Leone stepped out, dark suit, calm face, one hand casually in his pocket. "Boss," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "You should be resting." Stokes didn't turn around. "Should I?" Marco's smile flickered. "You gave the whole city a scare. A public shootout at the Mirabelle? You're lucky the press hasn't crucified you yet." Now Stokes turned, slow and deliberate. "Funny," he said, "that you sound more worried about the press than about me." Marco's eyes hardened, just a flicker. Then, just as quickly, he smoothed it over. "What's that supposed to mean?" Stokes took a step forward. "It means," he said softly, "you sold me out." For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the city below. Marco laughed. "Larry, come on. You've been under too much stress. Hussein's playing you." "Don't," Stokes snapped. His voice cracked like thunder. "Don't say his name to me again." He picked up the remote on the glass table and pressed play. The speakers came alive with Marco's own voice, cold, clinical, unmistakable. "Once the signature's done, move him out quietly. No noise. The body goes to the docks. Same as last time." Marco froze. The only sound was the clink of melting ice in the untouched glass. When he finally spoke, Marco's tone changed. No more charm, no more pretense. "Guess I underestimated your janitor," he said with a crooked smile. "You thought you were the wolf, Larry. Turns out, you were the sheep." He drew his pistol in one smooth motion, the silver glint catching the chandelier light. "Business," he said simply. "Nothing personal." Stokes didn't flinch. "Everything with you was personal." The tension snapped like a wire. Stokes lunged for the decanter, hurling it across the room. It shattered against the wall, glass and whiskey exploding into sparks. Marco fired, once, twice, bullets tearing through the luxury silence. Stokes dove behind the marble bar, the shots echoing like thunder in a cathedral. Then another voice cut through the chaos. "Drop it, Marco!" Both men froze. From the far side of the room, James Saunders stepped out of the shadows, a small recorder light blinking red in his hand. "You're live, Marco. FBI's been listening since you walked through that door." Marco's eyes went wide. "You!" He lunged, gun raised, and one shot fired. The sound cracked through the glass and rolled into the night. Marco stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, the gun clattering to the floor. He collapsed beside the couch. Blood seeping through his shirt, but his eyes still burning with hatred. James lowered his weapon slowly, breathing hard. Stokes stepped forward, trembling, fury still boiling beneath his composure. He picked up Marco's pistol and aimed it at him. For a long moment, no one moved. Marco looked up, sneering through the pain. "Go on. Be the boss everyone thinks you are." The room went silent, except for the distant wail of sirens below. Stokes's finger hovered on the trigger. Then, slowly, he lowered the gun. "I've spilled enough blood to last a lifetime," he said quietly. "I'm done." Marco's laugh was faint, bitter. "You'll never be done." Stokes looked at James. "What do I do now?" James stepped closer, eyes steady. "Start using it to clean what you built." Outside, the sirens grew louder, red and blue lights flashing against the glass walls like judgment itself. A helicopter circled above the tower. The elevator doors opened again. This time, men in FBI jackets flooded in. Marco was hauled to his feet, cuffed and cursing. Stokes stood there, still, watching it all unfold, the empire he'd built finally facing its reckoning. James turned to him as the agents passed. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "you kept your word tonight." Stokes nodded, voice low. "Maybe for the first time in my life." As they led Marco away, the city outside began to hum again. Traffic, lights, life. But, for the first time, it didn't feel like power to Stokes. It felt like noise. He walked to the window, staring down at the flashing lights below. For once, the sirens weren't for him. They were for justice. If you've been following James and Stokes this far, tell me in the comments, do you think redemption is possible for a man like Stokes? Or is blood too heavy to wash clean? The morning headlines hit like thunder. Hussein Assaf arrested in Dubai. International laundering network exposed across 7 countries. The Mafia banker who turned himself in. The news played everywhere, from cafe televisions to airport terminals, flashing Stokes's face beside Hussein's mugshot. 2 men once bound by greed, now divided by truth. The empire that had ruled in the shadows was finally burning in daylight. Inside a federal building in New York, Larry Stokes sat across from agents in dark suits. The same man who once orchestrated billion-dollar deals now stared down at a stack of papers, each one a confession. "You're really going through with this?" one agent asked. "You could disappear. You have the money, the connections." "I'm done disappearing," Stokes said quietly, signing his name. "Men like me hide behind silence. Maybe it's time someone didn't." He turned over encrypted drives, documents, and files, years of corruption he'd once helped build. For the first time, his power wasn't in what he owned, but in what he gave up. Meanwhile, across the world, the network began to crumble. Authorities raided penthouses in Dubai, offshore offices in Monaco, data servers in Switzerland. Dozens of arrests. Millions in seized assets. Hussein Assaf's empire, once untouchable, collapsed overnight. The man who thought himself a god ended up in handcuffs, his smile gone, his fortune frozen. The news cycle feasted on the story. Images flashed across every major network. Stokes walking into court, surrounded by federal agents. Hussein escorted off a private jet in cuffs. A janitor's grainy photo, half-cropped, labeled "the unknown whistleblower." Commentators called it the most shocking act of repentance in organized crime history. The Mafia banker who turned himself in. The deal that broke the syndicate. The janitor who saved a billion-dollar empire. But the truth? Not every redemption makes headlines. Late one night, Stokes sat alone in his office, what was left of it. The walls once covered in oil paintings were stripped bare. The desk was empty, except for a single envelope marked "Confidential." Inside was a report confirming the dissolution of his company. Stokes Global Holdings. Gone. And yet, for the first time, he didn't feel ruined. He opened another folder, one the FBI didn't know about. Inside were wiring instructions, foundations, and non-profit forms. The Saunders Initiative, community centers, youth mentorships, cybersecurity training programs, all anonymously funded. Every check signed under one name, James Saunders. Weeks later, a soft drizzle fell over Harlem. Stokes stood outside a small brick apartment building, collar turned up against the cold. He climbed the narrow stairwell, footsteps echoing through the quiet halls, and stopped at the door marked 4B. He knocked once. No answer. Twice, still nothing. He tried the handle. It opened easily. The apartment inside was neat, clean, a table by the window, a half-empty coffee mug, a mop leaning against the corner. On the desk, a small note lay beneath a folded newspaper. He picked it up. The handwriting was firm, but simple. You once said loyalty can't be bought. Maybe now you understand why. James Stokes stood there for a long moment, the city sounds whispering outside. He looked at the window, the view of Harlem rooftops glowing under the morning light, and smiled faintly. "Yeah," he murmured. "I understand." He folded the note and slipped it into his jacket pocket like something sacred. When he turned to leave, his eyes caught the brass plaque on the community center across the street. The Saunders Foundation, for the ones nobody listens to. A group of kids laughed under the awning, their sneakers squeaking on wet pavement. One of them pointed at the plaque and grinned, shouting, "That's named after a real guy, a janitor who saved a Mafia boss." Stokes chuckled softly, pulling his hat down over his eyes. "No, kid," he whispered. "He saved a man who just happened to be one." He stepped into the rain, blending into the crowd. No entourage, no guards, no empire. Just a man walking free for the first time in his life. The story that began with greed and silence ended with something rarer. Redemption bought not with money, but with truth. So, tell me, do you believe people like Stokes can truly change? Or are some sins too heavy to wash clean? Drop your answer in the comment section. And if you've followed this journey from the first shout to the final reckoning, hit subscribe. A full year had passed since the night the chandeliers of the Grand Mirabelle rained glass and gunfire. The city had moved on, as cities always do. New scandals filled the headlines, new names rose and fell. But on a quiet street in Harlem, something extraordinary had taken root. A modest two-story brick building stood between a barber shop and a small grocery. The sign above the glass door shimmered in the morning sun. The Saunders Foundation, for the ones nobody listens to. Children's laughter spilled out from the open windows, bright and alive. Inside, rows of computers blinked softly. A banner on the back wall read, "Truth, Courage, Integrity." At one table, a young boy coded his first simple game. At another, two teenage girls practiced Arabic phrases, giggling over mispronunciations. A volunteer mentor, a retired engineer, explained the basics of cybersecurity. Technology, he told them, is only as powerful as the hands that guide it. Every corner of the room hummed with purpose, the kind born not from wealth, but from redemption. Outside, across the street, Larry Stokes stood in the shadow of a lamppost. Gone were the tailored suits and bodyguards. He wore a plain coat now, his hair silvering, his face older, and lighter somehow, as though a lifetime of guilt had finally begun to lift. He watched the children through the window, watched the smiles, watched a community built on honesty, something his empire had never known. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the folded letter that never left him. The paper was worn soft from time to time. You once said loyalty can't be bought. Maybe now you understand why. James's words. The janitor who had saved his life vanished without fanfare, leaving behind only a name and a foundation that carried it forward. A bus rumbled past, splashing water onto the curb. The reflection of the building shimmered across the puddle. The Saunders Foundation, letters bending and reforming like memory itself. Stokes exhaled and whispered under his breath, "You did it, James. You really did it." Inside, a group of kids gathered around a young woman giving a short talk. "Do any of you know who Mr. Saunders was?" she asked. A few hands shot up. A boy in a hoodie grinned. "Yeah, my dad said he stopped some Mafia dude from stealing a ton of money." The room erupted in laughter. The woman smiled. "That's one version of the story. But here's the truth. Mr. Saunders wasn't rich or powerful. He was just a man who saw something wrong and decided to speak up, even when it could have cost him everything." Her voice softened. "That's what this place is about, using knowledge to stand up for what's right, no matter who's listening." The kids nodded. Some understood, some would later. But the seed was planted. Across the street, Stokes slipped his hands into his pockets and began to walk away. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. He knew what James would have said if he were here. You don't repay loyalty with money. You repay it with change. And maybe, for the first time in his life, Larry Stokes had truly changed. He crossed the street corner as the wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter. The kind of laughter that rebuilds the world, one honest voice at a time. As the scene faded, the city skyline rose behind the foundation, sunlight glinting off glass towers built by greed, and off one humble plaque built by truth. A quiet voice carried through the final frame. The narrator's words, steady and timeless. The janitor vanished from the world that broke him, but the world he rebuilt out of honesty and courage still stands. A beat of silence. Then the last line, simple, final, and true. Even the lowest man in the room can see the truth the highest refuse to look at. Power blinds. Conscience saves. Fade to black. If you've followed this story from the first "stop, don't do it" to this final moment, drop A for James Saunders in the comments. And tell me, what did you take from this story? Because sometimes the quietest voices leave the loudest echoes.